Hi, Hunter Hastings here. Entrepreneurship can be conducted at every scale, from the smallest to the largest. And our guest today has experience of all those scales. He was part of a founding team that established a medical data and records and analytics business, which they scaled to an IPO and beyond to become a large public company. He was also the founder of another medical services innovation business for the digital age, for which he raised venture capital, and which didn't grow as he expected. Now he's the founder and CEO of a financial services company for the digital age, a fintech company. And he's developed that from a self-funded standpoint to the point where it's ready for takeoff. So we can learn a lot from Kristian today about all those scales of entrepreneurship, and he's going to share his experiences. He's also going to make a generous offer of free financial consulting services to all of our listeners. So stick around.
This is the Value Creators Podcast. Value creation is the sole purpose of any business and every business, and for all of us as entrepreneurs. Listen to great value creators as they share their successes, trials, and lessons learned. Join us as we explore how to think as value creators, how to act as value creators, and how to view business through the lens of value creation.
Kristian, welcome to the Value Creators Podcast.
Hunter, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're the founder and CEO of FinStrat Management, but you've also been a value creator across a number of scales, from being part of a founder team that went to an IPO. So we look forward to hearing about that. You've started and grown venture-funded businesses, and now you're doing it as a serial entrepreneur. You're doing it another time. So we'll find out about all of those things.
Super excited to share my experience and be a benefit for your audience.
Well, thank you. So let's start at Inovalon. Am I saying the title of the company properly?
Yes, you are.
So we're going back to the late 90s, early 2000s. So for those of us who weren't there, that was a very exciting time with the growth of the internet and dot-coms and new technology. It was a fast growth time. And you were part of a found-up team, as I said. We like to think of founding companies as being customer-centric. You saw a need in the marketplace and you identified how to address that need, especially through new technology, but also new services. But sometimes that's a bit idealized. So tell us what it was really like at the beginning of Inovalon.
So really unique experience in so much as when I was originally hired, I was hired as a financial analyst, and the company's core business was consulting professional services. To the founder and CEO's credit, Dr. Keith Dunleavy, he 2 years into working together, he saw an opportunity in healthcare IT. Specifically the Medicare Modernization Act, that started to shine a significant light on opportunities to service payers, in this case, health insurance companies. So think Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, United. And during the course of this, we realized that there were not a lot of software providers who were providing quality measurement services. And so for your listeners who may not be familiar with U.S. healthcare, in effect, there are regulations in place that seek to confirm that if a insurance provider is receiving money from the U.S. government, that they want to make sure that there is a specific degree of quality being delivered in exchange for these Medicare members. This also exists at Medicaid to a degree. It exists with commercial members as well. But it really came to a head with Obamacare. And so in 2012, the federal government effectively withheld reimbursement from the insurance companies in return for specifically achieving 4 or more stars for quality measurement rating purposes. We're talking billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
And so it had the attention of many payers who are operating in the space, whereas previously they were really focused on quality because it was just philosophically something they thought was important, or because of accreditation purposes. But now there was real money on the line. And so the C-suite, from what's a generally conservative, slow-moving industry, took notice. And so this was 2012. And at this point, I was a vice president over the company's quality measurement and reporting services. I was overseeing a human-in-the-loop, technology-enabled quality measurement, as well as NCQA accredited disease management program. And the spirit of these programs was you can't improve what you can't measure. So let's use healthcare data to assess members who are compliant, perhaps more importantly, members who aren't compliant with stated quality of care. So think breast cancer screening, colorectal cancer screening. These are third parties who have opinions of how often, depending on if it's preventative or if you have a chronic or acute disease, the degree you should be receiving care from your physician team. And so we ended up creating a predictive analytic tool combined with clinical interventions that specifically sought to improve the care that was being received by Medicare Advantage members in the U.S. And after one full cycle's worth of analytics plus clinical interventions, we outperformed the U.S. market as a whole by statistically valid 2 standard deviations. And the size of our sample was valid. We had, at the time, approximately a quarter of the 10 million Medicare Advantage members in the U.S. enrolled in our program, from Puerto Rico to Hawaii to metropolitan rural areas in the continental United States. So statistically valid results showed that we possess the ability to influence the quality of care that seniors were receiving. And having been employee number 8 and getting to that point, you can imagine it was a really long but exciting journey. I was exposed to sales and marketing, contracting, operations. I had a department of 120 spectacular people. So got to hone my leadership skills and managerial skills over that time. For those of your listeners who know health insurances, they sometimes can be not very forgiving clients. And we consistently delivered on a whole host of very well-known health plans. And it was just a phenomenal learning experience. In practical terms, effectively we went from zero to 80 million plus in top line revenue in the course of 2 years on what's effectively an intra product that had a material hand in building. So that's the backdrop of Inovala.
So just let me pick up on a couple of things there to help entrepreneurs, Kristian. So you said you saw a marketplace opportunity. So what does that feel like? There was a piece of legislation that changed the environment.
Yep.
Does that feel like it dawns on you, or boy, this is a time to grab it, or it was a result of analytics, or it was a result of talking to customers? How did the opportunity turn into a plan for you?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I know there's a lot of, and this is going to dovetail on my experience with my current firm, FinStrat Management. Sometimes there's a belief that if you build it, they will come. And arguably, you can say there was a degree of that taking place within Inovala. However, I would say we took very calculated risks. We understood our market really well. And I think part of that was we already had existing dialogues with our clients by virtue of some of our other services that we were providing. And so at a significant amount of business intelligence, as opposed to just something logically that made sense. And I absolutely attribute that to the success. I attribute that to the confidence that we had to pull the trigger and invest in these offerings.
Mm-hmm.
We had to devote people, we had to devote software development to the product lines. But it was definitely based on having done our homework, just by virtue of the current services we were providing, but also just having an active dialogue with our clients, in addition to understanding the regs.
Could you say that the client co-created the solution, or was it entirely on your side, do you think?
It wasn't the client as much as it was the third parties. So CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, it's a government agency. They were tasked by the Obama administration with creating a framework by which they were going to assess quality. And so they did make it a little bit easier for us because they had to publish the scope of the yardstick. These are the measures that we're going to use. This is the criteria. This is the time frame. On a side note, if you've ever read government regulations, they can be a bit difficult to interpret. I can still remember today, I was at a conference when the regs first came out, and one of our competitors put up a timeline that was actually materially wrong. And just thinking to myself, there are other organizations that see this, but this is still so new that they really just haven't done their homework to appreciate the complexity of what the government has put out in front of the market. And so, it wasn't so much, clients, yes, absolutely influenced as it pertained to interacting with their members. They take that very seriously. And by consequence, we did as well. But in this case, it was really the government that was dictating the scope of how and when we were going to interact with the health insurers members.
Mm-hmm. You raised venture capital, I think, to support that growth period and the investment that you talked about in software and people and systems. Were the venture capitalists highly informed about the market, or were they simply supporting entrepreneurship? What was that like?
So the short answer is that it varied. So today, fast forward, I referenced FinStrat Management. Happy to elaborate. We work with investor-backed early stage companies. And so over the course of my career, I've been exposed to a whole host of investors, venture capital, private equity, angels. And what I can tell is that every manager has a thesis. Every manager has a formula by which they're going to make a decision of whether they're going to invest. Sometimes it's emphasis on the founder. Sometimes it's the market. Sometimes it's the product. Sometimes it's none of those per se, and they just look at everything in the aggregate or which way the wind's blowing. And it's not to say that one way is better than the other per se. I think probably one of the things that makes it challenging to be an active versus passive investment manager is that the times change. And a great example would be when the Federal Reserve started raising interest rates in Q1 of 2022, when money ceased to be inexpensive. Mm-hmm. It changes how you think about running your business. It changes how you think about deploying funds or capital from your fund. And so, a long way of saying, I haven't seen a one size fits all per se. Rather, it's a combination of factors that can be influenced at any given time, depending on what's going on in the market.
Yeah, that's what we refer to sometimes, Kristian, as subjective calculation. The venture capitalists are doing their calculus, but there's a lot of subjectivity, i.e. the different models that they have and the different approaches. So.
100%. And so I'll give you some additional consideration. So when I started my career, I ended up getting a professional designation. It's referred to the CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst charter holder. This year marks 2 decades as a CFA charter holder. And in simplest terms, it's the study of portfolio management. And yes, I mean, a lot of it's objective, but some of it's subjective. You have a lot of managers that look at portfolio management through different lenses. Some of the most successful active managers I know, have been successful because of the way they manage their downside. Mm-hmm. Meaning, if a position goes against them, whether it's a public asset or a private, in so much as, hey, I cut one check and I'm not going to invest anymore because you haven't been performing the way I want. That's been core to the way they succeed. But the problem is, private markets are less liquid. You really can't manage your downside as well. So I think the consequences is I see, especially a lot of early stage managers who, have historically adopted a spray and pray mentality. Meaning I'm going to hedge my risk by cutting a lot of smaller checks, understanding that it's only going to take a fraction of those checks to make up for my losses and create my gains. A lot of managers have been successful with it. The question is whether or not anything has changed or if there's an opportunity to do things better. I'm not a VC, but I definitely do see relationships that are a lot more calculated, especially today because money is more expensive. And the pace at which technology is improving is significant. You can have a lot of companies. My sense is today you find a lot of companies who see opportunities like Inovalon, but the time frame by which they can capitalize on it is shrinking. Because you now have embedded competitors who have a lot bigger balance sheets and the same exact tools at their disposal, who can start incorporating, features and functions in their existing platforms. And for those of you who've been in the trenches, it's a lot more difficult to unseat an incumbent because, especially given your industry, I mean, people just don't make decisions to change as quickly as they used to, given the time and money involved with doing so.
Yeah, that's the thesis of Peter Thiel's famous book, 0 to 1, right? You don't go after incumbents, find a way to be unique, and every firm should be a monopoly. I like that perspective.
That's a great point.
So let's move on in your development. Before we get to FinStrat Management, Kristian, you started another company called MD Agree.
Yep.
Please tell us about that, what you can, and there's some learning from that. In fact, I read from something you wrote that you learned a lot of things not to do from MD Agree. So please tell us about that experience.
So MD Agree was an asynchronous telemedicine provider. We started the company in late 2013, 2014. In simplest terms, it was a second opinion business for patients who received a critical diagnosis and required a unique but potentially life-altering treatment to facilitate getting them a second opinion. And so I had 2 fantastic co-founders, both physicians, very sharp individuals. As I like to describe it, there was a lot of brain cells in the room. And we were able to raise about $2.5 million pre-revenue on the premise of facilitating second opinions for critical diagnoses. Fast forward mid 2016, we ended up having to close the doors because we weren't able to get the company off the ground. Key takeaways from the experience is know your buyer inside out. If I had to do it all over again, I would have I would have spoken to the people who I believed were going to buy from us, because I would have found out that my logic was off and my understanding of the problem we were trying to solve wasn't going to work.
Just to be clear, when you say buyers, Kristian, you mean the patients who are getting the second opinion, or their
That's a good
doctors?
question.
Or
So a couple compounding issues. One, at the time, most insurance was not paying for telemedicine. And now this is really important because, for better or for worse, healthcare in the U.S., most physicians, take into consideration getting compensated for their time. And so, if you're doing an asynchronous review of a patient's conditions and records, most health insurance companies, to include the U.S. government, are not going to pay for that. And so immediately we find ourselves in a situation where there are headwinds. Now, there are scenarios where the patients will pay, but there was a compounding factor which we didn't originally consider until the tail end, was that our approach was wrong. So we approached the diagnosing physician as believing they were going to be our buyer. And the idea would be that if they provided a serious diagnosis to one of their patients, that they would want to assist the patient get a second opinion. And we realized we were wrong. Those physicians didn't want to have their judgment questioned by another physician, even if it was in the best interest of the patient. And so I had to do it all over again. I would have gone right to the physicians from the get-go and said, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the offering. Are you willing to log in here? Are you willing to facilitate this process? And what I would have found out is the answer is no.
Yeah, so that's fascinating. The need is there. The patient needs the second opinion. They've got an emotional need to find out about their serious diagnosis, but it's the approach. The reason I say that, Kristian, we have a innovation methodology we call NABC, which is what's the need and what's our approach to filling it. And that you were right there in figuring out the N and the A.
That's right. And so, if I take it a step further, so in the US, you have, I'll oversimplify it, but you have general practitioners who act as your front line, and you have specialists. And the specialists can be your cardiologist, your gastroenterologist, dermatologist. These are physicians who specialize in a specific branch of medicine. And what we realized after the fact is that what we should have done is marketed directly to general practitioners in more rural areas who didn't have access to specialists, and overcome boundaries of time and geography by enabling someone who may be, in rural America, but who has a patient who, received a cancer diagnosis, but would love the benefit of having someone in, Sloan Kettering in New York City review their case. Unfortunately, by this point, the bank account was near zero. We were unable to raise additional funds and had to make the unfortunate decision to close the doors.
Jill, for entrepreneurs who are listening, Kristian, tell us about that decision. Can you do that in cold calculus, or is that an emotional decision, or how did it feel?
There was a number of emotions. I will tell you, it was a difficult decision because it's a blow to your ego. But I think you have to reframe it and say, look, sometimes you get it wrong. And my opinion is you are better off not throwing good money after bad, especially in the world of third-party investors. I think that there's something I don't hear talked about, and I will happily talk about it here, is that I think founders who raise outside money should have a time frame in mind by which they're going to multiply the capital that they take. It's measured in years, but there are absolutely milestones along the way as well. Um, I didn't come up with this, and apologies to the author, but in the early stage ecosystem, it's triple, triple, double, double. In year one, let's call it, you should want to see at least $250,000 in revenue. But year two, you triple that. Year three, you triple that again, and then in 4 and 5, you're doubling it. And it's the idea, and it's not gospel, but the spirit of it is that there is something that resembles a measurable growth trajectory that outperforms, the U.S. GDP or risk-free rate as dictated by what you can get from a treasury. And my sense is that a lot of, maybe not all, but many founders don't appreciate that you can still have a great idea and have something that resembles product market fit, but you also have to be able to scale. Mm-hmm. Part of being a successful founder is the ability to ensure the world knows that you exist. And we're going to measure that by revenue growth. And if it's not there, you have to ask yourself, how much longer are you going to push on this before you say, maybe I need to just, take a single or a double versus a home run from this and sell my company to somebody else, or do a serious assessment of your own capabilities and say, maybe this is what I'm capable of. I can only take a company this far, and I really now need to bring on someone who can take it to the next level. It's my sense is that's difficult to do because it's a blow to the ego.
But I like your milestone idea. The point about venture-backed investments, I've always thought, is that you create value faster.
Yep.
And maybe at a smaller scale, but as you say, if you can triple your $250,000 first year, and the second year you're creating value at a faster speed than anybody else is, so that's meritorious. But then if you don't, would you shut it down, Kristian? Would you say this isn't working?
Well, I always think there's, if you have an asset on your hand that's generating revenue, you better have a really good reason to walk away from it. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of times founders maybe don't appreciate that there are micro acquisitions. Other businesses will acquire businesses for 6-7 figures on a regular basis. It really just comes down to, what's your recurring revenue, or do you have unique intellectual property baked into your tech that someone will value. And it does happen more often than you realize. And, it kind of brings up the point of understanding who your other competitors are, understanding who your potential acquirers are, and maybe even investing some energy in talking with your counterparts at those companies. If you feel like, hey, I may need to offload this, let me have the relationship to be able to do so.
Yeah, know your exit is one of the rules, right? So you shut down MD Agree. You immediately started another business.
Yep.
We'll ask you to tell us about that, but just give us the transition. Did you have it in mind before the end of MD Agree, or was it, one of those nagging light bulbs in the back of your brain? What was it?
It's a good question. So actually, shout out to Grant Elliott, who founder and CEO of Arlington, Virginia-based Astendio. We were introduced by a mutual colleague when I was doing the telemedicine company, and Astendio ended up becoming one of our vendors when I was running the telemedicine company. Grant and I became friends. And then after I wrapped up MD Agree, I reached out to everyone in my network, and just, for everyone who was at least in driving distance, I made a point of, stopping by and having lunch with them. And, kind of, it doesn't happen as much maybe in the post-pandemic days, but at the time, just, being face to face.
Yeah. Connections
with people. And, originally I thought that I saw a need, what looked like assisting founders raise capital. And because the process is maybe a bit enigmatic, and I could shed light on how it works. And Grant gave me great feedback. He goes, I understand that's not what I really need. He goes, right now I need an accountant who understands accrual accounting, because I need to be able to calculate my SaaS, software as a service, performance metrics. And it's only feasible if your books are prepared on a GAAP or accrual basis.
Mm-hmm.
And so I mentioned I got hired as a financial analyst. I mentioned as a CFA charter holder. I know accrual accounting. Prior to Inovalon, I was serving in a variety of accounting and finance related roles. And I wanted to get back to those accounting and finance roots. And so I said, God is putting this in front of me right now. There's a reason. Let me pursue it. And so I started working with Estendio, and I come to find out, getting exposure to his board members, there's a tremendous demand for companies who have software as a service for accrual accounting, because it's the only way that you can calculate SaaS metrics. And for the non-accountants in your audience, accrual accounting is not rocket science, but it does require a degree of attention to detail and consistency. And I have my theories, but I'd say more to the point is that I found that a lot of other accounting and finance firms struggled at consistently preparing financials on a GAAP basis, in addition to as it pertains to software companies who are looking to raise capital or subscription basis. And so FinStrat was born. And, in the beginning, I did not put my foot on the pedal, or put pedal to the metal to grow the company. But it wasn't to about 2021. So it was about 4 years in the company, where one morning I woke up and I said, you know what, I'm going to go a lot harder, because I realized now we had picked up enough clients to validate for me that we were actually onto something. And so today count my blessings, Hunter. We've experienced phenomenal growth. We have a phenomenal team, great clients. I see the value that we're adding. I'm just very grateful for the opportunity that I have to lead the company and, assist a lot of entrepreneurs out there, understand how their business is performing, to put them in positions to capitalize on their growth strategies.
We're delighted to announce the Value Creators online course. For entrepreneurs in every kind of business, big, small, or medium, at every stage, in every industry, our course provides the foundations and principles on which to build success. Simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to creativity, innovation, and competitively superior business action. There are 11 foundational principles or mental models that together cohere into the value business model. Principles for value generation, principles for value operations, principles for value finance and accounting, and principles for value sustainability, as well as the new knowledge accumulation you'll need for continuous innovation. These principles are delivered by top business professors from top business schools: Mark Packard, Per Byland, Gordon Miller, David Rapp, and Bart Vanderhagen. You'll find video lessons from them, along with downloadable tools, processes, and other valuable content. Master these lessons, and you'll master the most important skill in business: value creation. Go to thevaluecreators.com and click the course link. So, a couple of questions, Kristian. One is, we tend to talk in our theorizing about identifying your customers really carefully, choosing them very carefully, understanding them very deeply, because that's an advantage, a differentiation advantage. It sounds like you're right there. You've got a specific set of customers with a specific need, and you understand them because of your historical experience and your knowledge better than anybody else could. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say if you didn't hit the mark, you're near it. I still have a lot to learn. I have an amazing wife who makes sure that I remain humble, and that is the case.
It was good.
Yes. I try to keep an open mind. I try to be a student. It can be really difficult to keep up with what's going on, especially with the introduction of AI. It is something that I have carved out time to better understand the role that it can play with accounting and finance. In the simplest terms, I see a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I see companies who are raising money on the promise of incorporating AI in accounting and finance. I'm a bit skeptical. I'm a bit skeptical because from where I sit, I think some companies don't truly appreciate the market. And specifically what I'm referring to is, this concept of a platform. And it's not unique to accounting and finance. It exists in a lot of different industries. But you have, kind of going back to these incumbents, I see the biggest challenge any founder today faces is getting people's attention. You can still have the greatest product on the face of the earth, but if you can't get someone to listen to you, it doesn't matter. And part of the issue, I think, is compounded. Everyone's busy. Everyone has more things to do than there is time. And then introduce kind of this idea of, hey, I have something that's working really good right now. My switching costs are absolutely a consideration. And so in the accounting and finance world, it really starts with your accounting platform. And for the early stage ecosystem, Intuit's QuickBooks Online owns over 70% of the market. And so if anyone is going to pursue, I think, a product in the space, you have to be able to answer for yourself, what role do I play relative to QuickBooks? Because if you're going to try to build an accounting platform that competes with them, kind of your 0 to 1 reference before, good luck. I don't think you're going to beat them. And if you're going to create a tangential product, I'd say also good luck too, because it's just Intuit's already been rolling out AI-enabled features within their platform. And so I'm not saying I'm skeptical of the opportunities that exist. I'm just saying I'm being very selective. I won't reveal where I'm bullish because I'm taking advantage of them where we speak right now. But hopefully that gives you some insight as to how I'm thinking about this.
But when I made my notes from my research, Kristian, about FinStrat Management, I wrote down an outsourced CFO function, which, well, you'll tell me whether that's accurate or not, but that's a lot different than anything Intuit could do. They're not trying to do that, and they can't provide that service. So is that directionally correct?
It is. And so I give you a little bit of more color. So philosophically, so if you think of the role of a chief financial officer, they're intended to inform strategy as it relates to the company's finances with the C-suite. But in order to do so, you can't, I didn't come up with this, but you can't improve what you can't measure. And said another way, CFO can't provide guidance. The C-suite can't infer how the business is performing, or board or investors, unless you have a clean set of books. And so early in my career, I saw the financial models of colleagues who were standalone fractional CFOs. And no fault of their own, the models were only as good as the underlying accounting that the models were relying on. I can say this, so when we onboard a new client, 99% of the financials are a mess. And, for your investors on this call, I presume they're nodding their head. And so what I realized is that if I was going to deliver a superior outcome for my clients, I couldn't just do standalone CFO. I had to marry that with accounting. I'm told that's a bit unique, maybe not so much anymore, but I feel very strong that if our fractional CFOs are going to do a great job, we have to own the books. We have to own the back office. Because all of that rolls up into your models, into your dashboards. And unless that's accurate, you can have the best fractional CFO in the world, but it's the old garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. But the other thing that struck me, Kristian, is a bit like an Ovalon, you may have identified a major trend, I think, which is companies are rethinking how they're organized, what's inside the boundary of the firm and what's outside the boundary of the firm. We call it boundary breaking, but it's boundary spanning maybe. But the firm decides what to keep inside, what to keep outside, and an external CFO service is one of those decisions. So are they thinking like that? Are they thinking this is something I can put outside of my firm boundary and then focus better on what I do best inside?
I'm biased. I'll acknowledge that up front. But 19th century English economist David Ricardo came up with the idea of comparative advantage. And in simplest terms, it is, in order to maximize your ROI, focus on the things that you do best and outsource the rest. I agree with David. If I were to put FinStrat aside, very practically, any early stage company, most companies, but in particular the early stage, have a limited budget. And the question I think you have to ask yourself is well, what's my comparative advantage? I'd argue that it's going to be product, what you're building and selling to the market. Number two, a close second would be the ability to market and sell that product. But, I'm going to exaggerate to make my point. I just don't see a scenario where an early stage company needs to bring on a full-time chief legal officer. Like, why? You're probably only going to use a couple hours of their time in a given quarter. And then so if there's consensus on that line of thinking, I'd say, well, what are the other components of the business that are crucial but not core? My opinion is that accounting and finance is included in that category. And so really the question just becomes, well, at what point do you bring it in-house? I think the answer is subjective. When I find myself in this conversation, I generally say it's simply at the point where the C-suite feels like they need full-time access to a CFO. But again, I have an opinion that that can vary. I mean, it just depends on the nature of your business. You can be doing 100 million on top line and still only need a fraction of their time. But it's probably somewhere in there. When companies, the volume or need for ability to ensure you're on track or can course correct as need be, probably hits somewhere between $50 and $100 million in revenue.
Yeah, and I think it's part of this picture of thinking about the firm much more as a network than a structure. So, as you said, you've got that network connection available. You don't have to draw on it every minute of every day, but it's there when you need it. Instant response if you need it. Specialized response if you got a special problem. So
yeah, I mean, it's never been less expensive to start a company. I've only been around professionally for a little over 2 decades, but I mean, I can only imagine back in the 70s or 60s. I mean, effectively, there's no internet. How do you find and sell clients at scale? I mean, the pace at which companies are achieving unicorn status is, a fraction as what it was in the last 100 years. And I attribute that to technology. And I think it's only gonna get faster.
Yeah, and another way to think about it, besides technology, obviously, which is central, but it's also knowledge flow, the ability to connect myself to you. We've got more knowledge about SaaS accounting than anybody else I can connect to, and you're available. I can find that service. So it's knowledge transfer, knowledge flow, as well as technology, or the two together.
Agreed.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating time we live in. I really think the nature of the firm is going to change an awful lot.
I think you're on the money. No pun intended. And I think part of that too is understanding that speed is essential to this process. Depending on your personality, that can perhaps make you're fine with it. Sometimes I see that people are uncomfortable with it because there's so many unknowns. But I my sense is that if your mindset is in the set of, hey, I have something amazing and I want to share it with the world, and because I genuinely believe that, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that people know it exists.
Mm-hmm.
And so if there's truth to that statement, then it really should be a focus on product development and sales and marketing for any early stage company. And answering the question, can I measure, how do I measure success? I'd argue it's revenue. What's the quality of that revenue? It's one thing to continue to make new sales. It's another to retain your existing clients and can sell more to them. And then especially given where interest rates are, can I at least be break even, if not cash flow positive? Because money isn't as cheap, and I shouldn't expect that I'm going to be able to onboard new capital like I was, back in 2021 and earlier.
Yeah, we agree with you 100% about revenue as the key measure, because we think of it from the customer's standpoint. That means willingness to pay. You've got some service that they're willing to pay for. So revenue is the metric. And then the way we phrase what you just said is the entrepreneur then chooses the costs that are appropriate for that level of revenue, which, as you say, is cash flow positive.
Yep. And, that's where I think companies like fractional businesses make the most sense, because, your OpEx is effectively fixed as compared to your cost of sales. And so, if you can minimize your OpEx by effectively renting, a fraction of what you need, you're at an advantage.
Yeah. No, it's a great formula. So I understand that you provide strategy consulting to CFOs. Is that, or as a CFO to an entrepreneur, a founder, or a team? Is that right?
That's right. So back when 2017 started the company, I had a fractional CFO hat on personally. Today, we've fortunate, but have grown to the point where I've now focused exclusively on running the company as CEO. But we employ a number of fractional CFOs who work with our clients, and just effectively, as I mentioned earlier, it's giving the C-suite financially informed guidance that supports their growth strategy.
And what's the best way for us to access that? If any of our entrepreneurs are listening, how can they access that service?
Yeah, so if you're interested in connecting with myself, you can find me personally on LinkedIn. It's Kristian with a K, Marquez. If you would like to reach out to the company, the website is Fin, short for financials, Fin, Strat, short for strategy, and then MGMT, abbreviation for management.com. And then, Hunter, my pleasure to extend to your audience a free CFO consultation. If you just put a /CFO on our homepage, you'll see there's a form there where they can get time on our calendars, and happy to listen and provide feedback free of charge.
Well, good. That's outstanding. Thank you. We'll make sure everyone's aware of that, Kristian. So,
our pleasure.
As we wrap up here for time, what's the biggest challenge to growing your company, would you say? And I'm thinking generically to help other entrepreneurs, not so much your own personal challenges, but the market challenges of growing the company.
Sure. Well, I think you nailed it earlier when you said that your measure is revenue. If we unpack that, revenue equals new plus expansion minus gross. And so, if I like to joke, if you think back to when we were in high school and we said to our teacher, when am I ever going to use algebra? Well, here's when. And so if you know what how you're retaining your clients and your ability to cross or upsell them, and you want to achieve a certain amount of growth, well, then you really have to focus on new. And where I see a lot of opportunity for improvement is just this understanding of how new sales take place. I didn't coin the term founder-led sales, but I think it's really important, this idea that, hey, sure, you're the CEO, Everyone's relying on, your know-how and knowledge to drive the company's product. But until which point that you are seeing, consistent leads come at the top of the funnel and the ability to close those deals, you're leading the sales effort. Don't go out and hire a vice president of sales.
Mm-hmm.
That's a common reoccurring mistake we see, and we counsel against it. VPs of sales are intended to manage AEs and BDRs and be closers. They're not taking over, lead gen and walking deals their entire way through their sales cycle. And so I see that decision get made prematurely. This idea that, hey, I'm going to step away and I'm now going to just focus on running the company. And so for those founders who can really, really push on achieving product market fit as measured by revenue growth, achieving good scalability, so great retention. What's the quality of the revenue? Is there retention? Are you seeing expansion in addition to new? Then at that point, can you start to delegate the sales function? But I counsel against doing it before.
Yeah, that's great advice, Kristian. There's a meme out here. They call it founder mode. And it's, as you say, without trying to transition to professional management too early, the founders are the ones that focus on the key issues, the key problems, and key opportunities. In your case, it's customer connections and customer sales and closing. And that's what they do. And that's, as you say, not something you hire somebody for. That's founder mode. You go after it yourself.
That's right.
Good. Well, Kristian, thanks very much for today. Congratulations on FinStrat Management. We'll make your free CFO strategy consulting session available. And,
my pleasure.
We look forward to hearing more about your company growth as time goes on. Thank you.
Hunter, thank you for having me on. I appreciate the time.
This has been another episode of the Value Creators Podcast. Thanks for listening. You can visit thevaluecreators.com for links and resources related to this episode, and check out hunterhastings.com for more content on entrepreneurial business management based on value creation principles.